when you're sharing. Okay, we are recording. The subject this evening is ethics, and particularly personal and business ethics. And it's very appropriate for us, for me as a Reformed Jewish rabbi, and I think most of us are affiliated with Reformed congregations, to be discussing ethics. Because what I would describe as the essence of Reformed Judaism is Reformed Judaism holds that ethical laws are binding. In more traditional forms of Judaism, they would say all Jewish law is binding on all Jews. The ritual laws, you know, do you keep your head covered? Do you eat strictly kosher? Do you pray 3 times a day? And so on. And the ethical laws, which we're going to be talking about a lot this evening. In Reformed Judaism, there's no real official definition of Reformed Judaism. My own working definition of Reformed Judaism is that the ethical laws, those laws relating to how we treat one another, I would say animals and the environment, are binding upon us, us as Jews. And the ritual laws, do you keep kosher? Do you have mezuzah in every room of the house? Do you mix wool and linen in your garments? You know, all of those, lots and lots of ritual laws, those are between you and God. And you should study those laws and try them and see if you find them spiritually fulfilling and significant. I would say maybe even, do you find God speaking to you in those laws? But as a Reformed Jew, our major focus is indeed on ethics. So as always, I have the copies of these slides posted on my website. The only slight difference is if you go again from the main screen to classes, instead of lectures and classes, I'm kind of calling this whole series Jewish Literacy 2. So the handouts are in connection and with the Jewish literacy class. And as always, feel free to jump in if you have questions or want to add comments. So we'll cover a bunch of things. One is opening with I think is a very interesting subject. What do you think the first question you will be asked in heaven is? Judaism has something to say about that. I'll have a bunch of stories, and I will have a lot of quotes from scripture, from Talmud, from Maimonides. Let's see. Oh yeah, okay, and more. And scripture is incredibly important in the world of Judaism and rabbinics. Again, the underlying idea is we believe that God has communicated God's desires to us and God's instructions for us, and that communication is scripture. Yes, Robin.
I did not read the third one correctly when it said lots of quotes from Jewish tradition.
Oh, you shouldn't be an apostrophe, yes.
I thought that they belonged to lot.
Yes, yes, and you would be grammatically correct. But you would also be grammatically correct in pointing out a typo for me. Okay, and now we're going to spend some time focusing on Lashon Ha-Rah, which is literally evil speech, forbidden or strongly discouraged forms of speaking. So there is a wonderful book called The 7 Questions You're Asked in Heaven. And Jewish tradition teaches that God will ask us at least 7 questions when we arrive in heaven. So what do you think the first question will be? Anybody want to hazard? There's no, I mean, low risk here. You're not going to be graded.
Why are you here?
Why are you here? Meaning, why are you here up in heaven rather than the other place? Think God's surprised.
No question about that.
Okay. Any other thoughts on what God will ask us? And I'll
say, who are you? I never spoke with you before.
Yes, yes. Who invited you? Yeah, I'll steer us a little bit. The idea has a lot to do with what you did in your life. So what do you think God will want us to account for in our lives?
Why do you belong here?
Why do you belong here? Okay.
Did you enjoy the experiment?
Did you enjoy the experiment? I like that. Okay. Whoops.
Did you do the best that you were able to do with the tools that you had?
Yes, I like that very much.
Nice. Yeah.
So here's the quote, and it's from the Babylonian Talmud. Whoops. So when I have everybody up on the screen, I can't see my screen completely. So it said, Rava said, a Talmudic scholar, when a person is led for judgment in the next world, God asks, did you transact your business honestly? Did you fix times for the study of Torah? Did you fulfill your duty to establish a family? So the first question, as I say, sorry, Bernie Madoff, the very first question is, did you transact your business honestly? Why do you think that would be the first question? Any thoughts on that?
Because if you did not, you would be being dishonest with other members of your community, of the Jewish community, and that's not okay.
Okay. One whole very interesting element here is the whole idea of God asking anyway. I mean, you might presume that God knows the answers to all these questions.
Otherwise, why are you here?
Well, that could be a recognition that, in fact, the ethical duties are more important than the religious duties.
But it's actually business. Did you transact your business honestly?
No, I mean, it is in Torah. I mean, it does say weights and measures have to be
Yes, and we're going to
honest. It is listed there.
Yeah, so is kashrut, so is, is the Sabbath and so on.
Hold it. Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yes.
I think one of the other issues about the business thing being asked first is I think that's likely to be the one where you might have the most vested in. If you were honest in business, it means you're willing to take some losses in order to do what is right.
Yes,
some people find studying Torah or starting their families to be, that's something they want to do. Sometimes being honest in business is something you don't want to do.
Right. I agree with that. And I think that's the line of discussion that I've seen. It's easy to put on your tzitzit. It's easy to keep kosher, but it can be very tempting to cut corners on business, to cheat in a transaction. So that's where the essence of this discussion goes. And if you're interested in the other 7 questions, I actually have a sermon on my website on that subject.
So, Rabbi Lacker,
yes,
Jane. So, when I look at those 3 things, I agree with, I guess Cheryl had said that, or somebody else, that of the 3 things, the first one is the one that actually, if you don't do that, then other people are adversely affected. Individuals are adversely affected because your counterparties are affected.
I agree with that. Yes.
And also, if you are not honest in your business, you are just ipso facto, I guess you could say, lying, cheating, stealing, which you're not supposed to do anyway. So whether it's in business or not, if you're lying, cheating, stealing, God would ask, why the heck are you here if you did not
violating the commandments?
And by the way, and I want to move on because actually I have a lot of material, but there's this whole tradition of a life review. I mean, I taught some time ago, and I think it's also on my website, a class on Jewish views of the afterlife. And one of the ideas is very much that you will actually go over what you did in life before your judgment. I also want to point out that
Brooks.
I'm sorry?
Albert Brooks did a movie called Defending Your Life. And after you're dead,
I can't resist this. Hold on.
You had to defend it.
What is he doing?
You mean this one?
I
love this movie. and I think it has great Jewish value. And maybe we'll have a joint movie discussion. Yes, it's very much along those lines. Okay, so Rabbi Elliot Dorff, whose book I spent a lot of time focusing on last week, has a whole series, and this is actually a photograph on my desk, of 6 books on Jewish ethics. The one we're going to talk about tonight, business ethics element, is mostly on money, but war, body, social justice, power, sex, and intimacy. I guess there's easily a class on each of those. So I'm going to read some stories, and then I'm sorry, just having some technical problems. And we can discuss them. I'm not exactly sure how to move through all this material. But many of you are familiar with Musar. The founder of the Musar movement in the early 1800s, mid 1800s, was a mashgiach, Rabbi Israel Salanter, someone who supervises kashrut. His job was to watch the workers preparing matzah. Once when he was ill, his students asked what they should look for while they were taking his place. He said, "You know those women who knead the dough?" "Yes," they replied. "You know that the matzah that they make can take no more than 18 minutes from start to finish, and that is a very meticulous timing. By the way, that's why they have the perforations in the matzah, so it cooks in less than 18 minutes. "Yes," they said. "The women work very hard for little money. They are poor. See to it that they are not underpaid. That is essential for the making of kosher matzah." So this is very much a Musar ethical approach to even the ritual issue about what makes matzah kosher. You know, you can buy this matzah shmora, which supposedly the grain is guarded against accidental content with water from the time the grain is harvested. I mean, I won't go into that whole discussion, but I like this approach. What makes the matzah kosher is that the people that made it were well treated. We are going to talk about several different kinds of texts. Just see what we have here. And I just want to go over them briefly. We have the Bible, Torah, prophets, and writings. The dates here are approximately the dates that scholars say that they reached their current form. And then we have something called the oral law, rabbinic literature. So the myth is that when Moses was on Sinai, God gave to Moses not only the written law, but also an oral tradition, never to be written down. And about 1400 years later, the leading rabbi of the time, Yehuda HaNasi, writes them down. This is after the revolt against Rome. The schools of rabbis are being harassed, and he believes if he doesn't write it down, it's going to be lost. So you have the Mishnah. We're going to see quotes from Mishnah. And then for the next few hundred years in the Holy Land and in Babylon, the rabbis discuss the Mishnah. And their discussion, their commentary is called the Gemara. And Gemara plus Mishnah equals Talmud. And I often say this, in fact, I say this until I am blue in the face, that the religion that we practice is not the religion. Let me put it this way. It's a woeful misstatement to say our religion is the religion of the Hebrew Bible. More accurately, the religion we've practiced for the last 1900 years is the religion of the Talmud. And we can talk more about that, but that's not the focus of this class. And then you have lots of people commenting on the Torah. So you have a mystical commentary on the Torah, which is the Zohar. You have comments by Rashi on everything. Maimonides creates a code of Jewish law called the Mishnah Torah. Another very important code of Jewish law is created in the 16th century called the Lashon Ha-Rah. It's the first code of Jewish law created after the invention of the printing press, so it's very widely distributed. Questions arise and questions are answered. That's responsive literature. There's midrash, or stories that the rabbis add to address certain questions. And then from all of this material, we have our prayer book. So that's just kind of an overview of Jewish sacred literature, because I'm going to be quoting from much of it. Okay, so just some very important biblical texts. And again, I'm not 100% sure how to do this. I've never presented this material before. So I like the way we started. If you have something you want to say about any of the material, just chime right in. If you raise your hands electronically, I will definitely see you. I can only see 6 or 7 of you at the moment. So you might be frantically waving to raise your hand and I might not see you. So in Leviticus, in the Holiness Code, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am Adonai. I am the Lord. When you sell property to your neighbor or buy property from your neighbor, you shall not wrong one another. And then from Deuteronomy, and this is the one I think, Cheryl, you mentioned.
Yeah.
You shall not have in your pouch alternative weights, larger and smaller. You shall not have in your house alternative measures, a larger and smaller. You must have completely honest weights and completely honest measures if you are to endure long on the soil that the Lord your God is giving you. For everyone who does these things, everyone who deals dishonestly is abhorrent to the Lord your God. And I want to point out, it doesn't only say be honest in your weights and measures. And understand what we're talking about. If you had a scale, in these days, it's like the scale of justice. Somebody wants to buy, 2 shekels worth of wheat. A shekel is actually a weight. You'd put your 2 shekel weight on this side and you'd pour wheat on this side until they balance. So clearly a way of cheating would be to have alternative weights. So the thing that I find so interesting here is you're not even allowed to own false weights and measures. The text is not saying you can't use them, but you're not even allowed to own them. And then the other thing is, it's a phrase that's very interesting and gets picked up on by the prophets. You have this phrase, if you are to endure long in the soil the Lord your God is giving you. Remember, this is Deuteronomy in the Torah. So the idea here is, and the prophets pick up on this, if you violate God's laws, and certainly in this case, the ethical laws, with apologies for those of you who just finished dinner, the text says basically the land will vomit you out. It's as though you've eaten a bad piece of meat and you need to get it out of your system. So we are given the land. We're very proud of saying that this land, is the promised land and it's given to us, but it's given on condition. And here's a quote that clearly says one of the most important conditions has to do with honest weights and measures. My point in presenting a lot of this material to you is to point out to you how much in our biblical texts and other texts deal with business and personal ethics. So again, as people have comments, just jump right in.
I have a question.
Yes.
Does the beginning of what we're looking at, the Leviticus quotes, do those suggest you cannot treat a Jew differently or a non-Jew differently from a Jew in your business actions?
There are differences, and it'd be interesting to actually look at the language in Hebrew. There is, in the world of ethics in Judaism, there is a kind of a concentric circle approach. You have ethical, we talked about this a little bit, we talked about medical ethics. Your primary responsibility is to yourself, then your family, then your kind of extended family, your community, and then the world, and then the larger community and the world at large. So we're going to see actually in some of the later texts, I think, specific discussions about treating non-Jews. But there is clearly a sense that these laws are intended for Jews, and many of them refer to how you treat other Jews, with the idea that Jews were a nation largely cut off from other nations. It's a very good question.
So in other words, when you hear treat thy neighbor, love thy neighbor as thyself, that's basically your Jewish neighbor and everybody else is secondary?
I would say secondary is the right word. It doesn't say don't treat them well, but my understanding of this is your primary obligation is to your community and your people.
I don't think that's ethical.
I don't disagree with you, but I would say I think what happens is in the commentaries we extend that more broadly. Okay, a very important quote. When Jimmy Carter took the oath of office, he had the Bible open to this quote. He has told you, O man, what is good and what the Lord doth require of you, only to do justice, to love goodness, and to walk modestly with God. Then your name will achieve wisdom. Sometimes this is translated as walking humbly with God, but basically very much ethical overtones. Isaiah, learn to do good, devote yourself to justice, aid the wronged, uphold the rights of the orphan, defend the cause of the widow. In the Torah, 36 times you are commanded to protect the powerless in society, and that is the most repeated commandment in the Torah. And a very famous quote from Hillel in the Mishnah: "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" So first, center focused, but if you're only center focused, that doesn't meet the standard either. And I guess you have to move things around on my screen. Who is mighty? Those who conquer their evil impulse. As it is written, one who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and one who rules over his spirit is better than one who conquers his city. Who is rich? Those who are content with their portion. As it is written, when you eat the labor of your hands, happy will you be, and all will be well with you. So again, this is in the Mishnah, and what you see a lot in the Mishnah as a matter of style is an assertion, and then they will quote someplace in the Bible to back up that assertion. I think this is a very profound statement. The person who is rich is the person who is content with his portion. I think it was Michael Milken is the person I always point to, who invented, I think, the junk bond industry.
Drexel Burnham Lambert.
I'm sorry?
He did it for Drexel Burnham Lambert.
Right.
And then they went bankrupt.
And he went to jail when he was violating the rules. And I think I calculated at that time, he was making something like somewhere between $2 and $4 million a day. That's how much money he was making for himself. So imagine here was someone who is making, let's say, $2 million, and he basically violates the law so he can make $4 million a day. I don't know about you, but I can't imagine what I would do with $4 million a day that I couldn't do with $2 million. But clearly, he didn't get, go ahead.
That's not a matter of money. It's a matter of ego.
Yes.
No.
Yes, absolutely.
And it was, narcissism.
Yeah.
I would
say
say
monopoly with real money.
Yeah. And if your goal in life is wealth, no matter what that number is, you can always aspire to 2 times that number. I remember reading somewhere that they interviewed people and they asked them, how much more salary would you have to make to feel, very comfortable and not worrying about money? And the answer was uniform. And the answer was largely 25% more than whatever the person happened to be making when they were asked the question. So this is one of the things, this insight was one of the things that convinced me that I could never really find happiness in just trying to make more and more money. Because I could always be, the question is, do you look up at the people that are making a lot more money than you? Or do you look at the people that are making money, a lot less money than you? So now in the Mishnah Torah, similar to what we just saw, it's forbidden to cheat people in trade or deceive them. Oh, this is good to respond to Robin's point. This rule applies to both Jew and non-Jew. one who knows that there is a deficiency in his products is obligated to notify the buyer. That's an interesting point. If you know you're selling, well, we're going to actually see more on that subject.
Disclosure.
Sorry?
Full disclosure.
Full disclosure. Okay, so this is the point on who is wealthy. I love this little story. A business executive wanting a different sort of vacation hired a fishing boat to take him out to sea. They sailed, they fished, and the executive was more relaxed than he had been in years. One evening, the business person said to the fisherman, "Why don't you franchise?" "Why would I want to do that?" replied the fisherman. "You could have dozens of boats giving fantastic fishing tours in many cities," answered the executive. "So what?" responded the fisherman. "You can make millions of dollars. Think of what you could do with all that money," exclaimed the executive. "I would sail out on the sea, put my feet up, open a bottle of wine, and watch the sunset," said the fisherman. With that, the fisherman put up his feet, poured a glass of wine, and watched the sun set. And the executive understood. And the story is on the, I saved it for you so you can use it too. Just some stuff from the Talmud on ethical treatment of workers and customers. Rabbi Yehuda used to go to the house of study, the academy, carrying a pitcher on his shoulders, namely doing work. He would say, "Great is work as it gives honor to the worker." Rabbi Shimon would carry a basket on his shoulders, and he would say, "Great is work as it gives honor to the worker." By and large, the rabbis in the Talmud had other jobs in addition to being rabbis and scholars. Some of you know that Rashi, for example, this is much later, but Rashi was a vintner. Maimonides was a physician. And these are, probably the two most prolific people writing on Torah and Talmud and everything else. From Leviticus, do not oppress your neighbor and do not rob them. Do not keep the wages of the worker with you until morning. Very important. I always worry about this one. You hire someone to come in and clean your home, and you pay them at the end of the day, and you may discover that you don't have enough cash lying around to pay them. So you say, "Well, don't worry, next week I'll pay you. I'll pay you for this week and next week." Well, that's not okay. That is violating a commandment, because that amount of cash flow might not be critical to you, but it might be absolutely critical to the person you're paying. Do not oppress the hired labor. This is now from Deuteronomy, who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your people or one of the sojourners in your land within your gates. Also responding to your point, Robin. Give them his wages in the daytime, and do not let the sun set on them, for he is poor and his life depends on them, lest he cry out to God about you, for this will be counted as a sin for you. There's a lot of rabbinic discussion about how God gets really upset when people cry out to God. This happens in Sodom and Gomorrah, it happens in Egypt, and so on. And then in the Talmud, they pick up on the same line, his life depends upon them. And they ask, so why is he climbing a ladder or hanging from a tree or risking death? Namely, why is this laborer working at dangerous jobs? Is it not for his wages? Another interpretation, his life depends on them, indicates that anyone who denies a hired labor his wages, it's as though he takes his life from him. Also very interesting from the Mishnah. One who hires workers and instructs them to begin work early and to stay late in a place where it is not the custom to begin work early and stay late, the employer may not force them to do so. In a place in which it is the custom to feed the workers, he must do so. In a place in which it is the custom to distribute sweets, he must do so. Everything goes according to the custom of the land. So again, I find it just fascinating to highlight what in the Talmud is being so specific about treating your workers. Here's a really interesting one. A shopkeeper must not give children parched corn or nuts, for he entices them to buy everything in his place, which amounts to unfair competition. The sages permit this. Rabbi Judah forbids lowering prices for the same reason, but the sages permit it. So there's an argument going on here. Generally, when the sages permit something, that turns out to be the law. but they were actually worried about somebody just giving free samples. And here, forgive me, but I was thinking about drugs and, getting people hooked. But there's concern about kind of entice or even distributing cigarettes or to children. So yes,
I'm here.
Yeah.
This last thing here I think is sort of ridiculous. The largest retailer in the world gives free samples before this pandemic that we're having, 7 days a week, every hour that it was open. I'm talking about Costco.
Yes.
I know people who would go to Costco just to have lunch.
Right.
Like eating free
Yes.
samples.
Yes.
And you're probably talking to one of them right now.
Yeah. So, I mean,
I can't buy this stuff, Rabbi.
You don't have to buy it.
I have to.
No, you don't. You don't. Jay, I'm just pointing out, here they were talking about children. So I think they are, they're envisioning a world where, imagine a world where most people are very poor. And now you have a shopkeeper who's going to give kids some of these treats. And now the kids are going to drive their parents crazy to get the treats. So my real point is not so much the details of the law, but how much our tradition focuses on treating not only your workers, but even your customers and their children. I mean, clearly we need to adapt to the
Being an
times.
ex-retailer, the majority of my life, I happen to think that Costco is brilliant. If you would see the people eating the samples and then going and grabbing the box.
Yeah. We don't have to belabor it. Actually, I thought you were going to talk about the issue of cutting prices. And
they do that too.
Yeah. So here's an ethical issue. Not Costco, but Walmart. So Walmart cuts prices, and many of us shop at Walmart because their prices are very competitive. And it turns out they may be buying their supplies from places where child labor exists, where people are not paid a living wage. So the question is, do we as Jews have an ethical responsibility to that end? And I would say our tradition teaches us we do. We're not, and that we should worry about someone that's just having, just slashing prices without focusing on the consequences of slashing.
But do you think there's any retailer that slashes a price that does not want to make money?
No, I know they want to make money. The question is, are they treating their employees justly?
I think it's also trying to, this is a recipe for how to build a society that you can live in, okay? And for me, the intent that I get from this is, you give the children treats and it makes them come back, and the parents may not have the money to buy it, and yet now you've created dissension. You're creating an unfair demand. That was, I think, the intent. Another one is that if you lower your prices to the point where you start driving your competition out of business, like so many of the huge retailers have done, then you end up with a situation where people can now that there's no competition, they just raise the prices up.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that, but that's definitely true. You can have a large company that can basically price their competitors out of business, and then they can raise prices. And again, my point.
Is there an ethical problem with Amazon that is driving more retailers out of business than Walmart did?
I like that lady.
I think, well, I'm glad I hit her phone number so you can't harass her, Jay. But I think you raise a question, and what I would say in Judaism, the issue is it ethical? And, should you patronize local suppliers? Do you buy books from your local bookshop, or do you buy it through Amazon? These are important questions. And my main point, and I'll just be saying it over and over again, is that our tradition speaks to it. From the Talmud, Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon, on the matter of a stolen lulav is not valid for Sukkot. It's invalid because in the case of a commandment being performed through a sin. Lulav is what you shake on Sukkot. So this raises a whole other, set of sources, which gets discussed all the time. Would you accept, as a synagogue, would you accept donations from people who did not earn their money legitimately? It's a very big issue. Here's another one on.
Actually, let me, if I could interject.
Sure.
Actually, I was involved with a transaction, which many of you may have heard of here in the East. This was something like 30 years ago, and it was called OPM leasing, which stood for other people's money. A bunch of Orthodox Jews who set up this absolute fraud and made gazillions of dollars and gave a lot of money to the temple, and everybody was, thanking them and congratulating them and so on, and never seemed to occur to them that maybe they had gotten this money, by basically cheating, which of course they had, and they all went to jail. But
yeah, and then the interesting question is, were the funds returned or given to charity? Bernie Madoff was very charitable. And he gave.
Yeah, exactly. And they were giving it to the synagogue, and they were all kinds of new rules on the synagogue. They wanted it to be more Orthodox. They wanted to put up a mechitza, and created a lot of political problems in the synagogue. And it turned out that they were just crooks.
Okay.
A lot of Jewish organizations invested with Bernie Madoff.
Yes.
And then when he went under, they went under.
Yes.
By the way, they had a subsidiary, OPM leasing, called AMG, which stood for Andere Menschen's Geld.
Okay. Concern with products that you sell here in Hulin 94A. We are taught on early rabbinic authority that a person should not sell anyone's shoes made from a hide of an animal that died by itself and claim the animal was actually slaughtered for two reasons. One is because we're talking about roadkill or disease. First, because the seller is deceiving the buyer. Second, there's an element of danger involved, for the animal may have died from a disease that could endanger the buyer of the shoes. Rambam again, it's forbidden to cheat people and trade or deceive them. Oh, I think I had that someplace else. It was so hard to figure out what I had already put in and what I hadn't put in. I was going blind. Modern source from Abraham Joshua Heschel, who wrote many books on the prophets. The more deeply immersed I became in the thinking of the prophets, the more powerfully it became clear to me what the lives of the prophets sought to convey, that morally speaking, there is no limit to the concern one must feel for the suffering of human beings. It also became clear to me that in regard to cruelties committed in the name of a free society, some are guilty and all are responsible.
That's a very interesting statement given today's, what's been going on today,
yes.
At this time.
Yeah.
And the issue of collective responsibility and refusal to accept it.
Yeah, there are some quotes which I didn't include, which said that, if your community is committing sins and you don't step in to resolve them, you bear some of the guilt. There is this sense of communal responsibility in Judaism. And Heschel, by the way, marched with Martin Luther King. More texts. Where or whence do we learn that one does not hand a cup of wine to a Nazirite who has taken a vow to abstain from alcohol, and the limb from a live animal to a Gentile who is bound by the Noahide law, which forbids eating such meat? Scripture teaches, you shall not place a stumbling block before the blind. I'll read one more quote and then we can discuss the stumbling block before the blind. It's forbidden for anyone to lend money to another without witnesses. Even lending to a sage without witnesses is forbidden unless one lends on security. And it is still better if the loan is recorded in a document. Anyone who lends money without witnesses violates, you shall not place a stumbling block before the blind. There is this very strange mitzvah commandment in the Holiness Code saying you should not place a stumbling block before the blind, which seems pretty absurd on its face. I mean, who in there, who could ever imagine, oh, here would be a great joke. I see a blind person coming down the street. I'm going to put a crate in front of them, and then we'll all have a good laugh when this person, falls all over it. And so the rabbis basically say, if you take unfair advantage of someone who might be blind to what you're doing, or even tempted. So this is an interesting one. Don't hand a cup of wine to a Nazarite. The Nazarite has sworn off of wine, and you don't want to tempt that person. So again, I would say, modern times, there are people that are alcoholics, and they shouldn't, they shouldn't be drinking. And we as hosts should be sensitive to that and make sure that we don't put people in a place where they might be tempted to do something that's not in their best interest.
Well, this is interesting because it's acknowledging people's weaknesses and telling you not to take advantage of them.
Yes.
Or not allow them to take advantage of you.
At Temple or Ami, they serve only grape juice on Friday night and Saturday for Kiddush.
Yeah, I would say a lot of places will have both, but I know Paul Kipnis very, very well, and I know that Jews in recovery or people in recovery are a special concern of his.
Yes, they are.
Yes, and I respect him greatly for that. One of the issues I always think about with the stumbling block before the blind is if you have people coming into your home, let's say to clean your home, you don't leave valuables lying around. You don't leave rings or cash lying around. Clearly, they are responsible for not stealing. But if someone, is in the midst of making a decision, do I pay the rent or get my kid's medicine this week? Leaving some cash lying around or leaving your wallet out is violating the commandment in rabbinic thought of placing a stumbling block before the blind. This one I also found very interesting. Maimonides, again, wrote a legal code. So this is from Laws on Lending and Borrowing. Anyone who presses a poor person to pay back a loan, knowing that he, the poor person, has nothing with which to pay him back, violates a negative commandment. For the Torah says, do not act toward him, poor person, as a creditor. Beyond this, it's forbidden for a person to even appear before someone indebted to him when he, the creditor, knows that he, the debtor, has nothing. Even to pass him by is forbidden, so as not to frighten him or embarrass him, even though he, the creditor, is not claiming his money back, and all the more so if he is trying to collect the loan. And just as it is forbidden for this one, the creditor, to claim the loan when he knows the debtor cannot pay him, so it is forbidden for that one, the debtor, to keep his money of his friend in his hand and say to him, go and come back another day when he has the money to pay him back. As the Bible says, do not say to your fellow, come back again, I give it to you tomorrow when you have it with you. It's similarly forbidden for the borrower to take a loan and spend it for unnecessary things and to waste it such that the creditor will never be able to collect it. Even if the creditor is very rich, one who does this is an evil person. As it says, the wicked person borrows and does not repay. The sages commanded, let your friend's money be as dear to you as your own. This is certainly not the rule of law that debt collectors use. And I think a lot of this, is sort of summarized by you should always be thinking about someone else. and about how even actions such as passing someone in the street might affect the other person. When we get to Lashon Ha-Rah, gossip and evil speech, we're going to see more of this. And one of the things, I mean, I think, Jane, you were talking about the other person's money in the Orthodox world. It is a shanda that I don't think most people think of Orthodox Jews as especially honest and business worthy. That's not necessarily the first thing that comes to your mind. I think that is to our disgrace. One of the things I admire, quite frankly, about members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, is I think they are astoundingly ethical and honorable. And it is a shame on us that
it is a shanda for the Jews.
Exactly, shanda being the Yiddish
It really
word
is.
for
Yes, I agree with that. But the thing is that a lot of the people who did that, they really figured, you know what, we're just stealing from the goyim, so it doesn't
yeah,
matter.
but not okay.
Not okay, I agree.
Okay, this one has to do with coveting. I think in the last class we were talking about coveting. I think a lot of you are really not going to like this. What does it mean to covet? You know, the 10th commandment, most commandments in Judaism are about what you do, not about what you think. Coveting is desiring. So here, Maimonides is struggling with what is actually coveting and what's prohibited. Anyone who covets someone else's male or female slave or house or utensils or anything else that is possible for him to buy from him, and he talked at length about it among his friends and implored him until he bought it from him, even if he gave him much money, he has violated a negative commandment, as the Torah says, do not covet. So again, the case here is somebody sees a guy owns a ring, and this guy just loves the ring, and he talks about it and keeps offering him more and more. Even if he offers him a lot of money and buys it, he's violated the commandment of not coveting. We do not flog a person for violating this prohibition because it doesn't include an act. So that's interesting. Back in the days when Rambam was writing, we didn't have the power to flog anybody. He does not violate this prohibition until he purchases the item he craved. As it says, you shall not covet the silver and the gold on them, images of other God, and keep them for yourselves. The latter phrase indicating that it must be coveting that includes an action to be culpable for actual punishment. I must admit, some of these I had never seen till I started preparing for tonight. The way of a sensible person is to establish for himself an occupation by which to support himself, then buy a house, and afterwards get married. That's an interesting order there. We've got that in mind. Saying you can cut this out and send it to your children. The rabbis taught a man is responsible. These are the obligations of a father. Is responsible to circumcise his son, to redeem him from the temple services he is firstborn, Pidyon Haben. We can talk about that, but it's a ritual act that Reform Jews don't get involved in these days. To teach him Torah, to marry him off to a woman, and to teach him a trade. And there are those who say he must also teach him to swim. And Rabbi Judah says anyone who fails to teach his son a trade teaches him to steal. I'm going to mute you, Robin. This is a statement about whose job is better. A favorite saying of the rabbis of the academy at Yavna. Yavna was the first rabbinic academy after the Roman revolt, was this: I am a creature of God, and my uneducated neighbor is also God's creature. My work is in the city, and his work is in the field. I rise early for my work, and he rises early for his. Just as he cannot excel in my work, I cannot excel in his. Will you say that I do great things in the way of Torah, and he does little? We have learned that it matters not whether one does much or little, as long as he directs his heart to heaven. So don't look down upon the work of others. This, I think we saw before, whoever withholds a worker's wages, he takes his life from him. And Rav said, oh, this is interesting. Rav said, the property of householders can be confiscated by the government for 4 things: So someone who does one of these four things, they can have their property confiscated by the government. They withheld wages of a hired hand because they oppressed a hired hand, because they took the yoke off their necks and placed it on their fellow's neck. That phrase rings differently than it did a month ago. And because they were arrogant. But arrogance outweighs the others. And about humble people it is written, but the lowly, the humble shall inherit the land and delight in abundant well-being. Now, can you imagine anyone withholding wages from people you owe money, oppressing people that work for you?
I can't imagine anyone.
Being arrogant, it's hard to believe that someone might practice such things.
You are being facetious.
Okay.
I'm trying to.
Having been an associate at a law firm, I will say that sometimes I felt pretty oppressed.
Yes, yes. Who is it that said, "I never joke"? I can't remember.
Oh, somebody just said that.
Oh.
I don't kid.
I don't kid.
Always
I don't
assume.
kid.
Always assume that I am struggling with my Yetzer Hara. Okay, another Mishnah. The reason that we are descendant from one person, the reason Adam was created alone was to teach that destroying a single life is to destroy a whole world, and saving a whole life is to save a whole world, and for the sake of peace of creation, that no one should say to another, my ancestor was greater than yours, and so that the heretics cannot say there are many powers in heaven, and to proclaim the greatness of the Holy Blessed One. For when a person makes many coins from one die, they're talking about minting coins here, they all look alike. But when the Holy One stamps every human being with the die of the first Adam, and none resembles the other, for this reason, each and every person must declare, for my sake the world was created. There is a Musar teaching, which I think is Talmudic, that you should always walk around with 2 scraps of paper, one in each pocket. And on one it says, for my sake the entire world was created. And the other one you should say, I am nothing but dust, and I will return to dust. I was created from dust, and I will return to dust.
Question.
Yes.
Line 1.
The Genesis.
For this reason, Adam was created alone.
Yes.
Now, we had one hell of a long discussion this week, or maybe it was last week.
Yes.
That Adam and Eve were created at the same time.
Well, and the question is whether in the first creation you had a male and female aspects in the first Adam. So in Jewish tradition, you have a problem. We talked about this a lot. The problem is in the first chapter of Genesis, God creates Adam in God's image, and then it says, male and female, he created them. So on one level, it seems like there's one Adam. On another level, it seems like there's male and female, he created them. And one rabbinic answer to this is that the first Adam, which is called Adam Rishon, was both male and female, and either was a hermaphrodite with male and female sexual organs, or sometimes imaged as Siamese twins with a male half and a female half, and the surgery in Eden was to cut them in half.
There was a
Or
surgery
how about parthenogenic?
in Eden?
I'm sorry, the surgery in Eden when
was a surgery in Eden?
Yes, God caused Adam to fall into a deep sleep, and from Adam's Selah, God created the woman. Selah, often translated as rib, but the Hebrew word Selah can also be translated as side.
Oh, I hope he had Blue Cross.
The ethics of the fathers, Rabbi Yossi said, the property of others should be as precious to you as your own. Let all your deeds be for the sake of heaven. Another one of Hanina ben Dosa's favorite teachings, when one pleases one's fellow creatures, God is pleased. When one does not please one's fellow creatures, God is not pleased. Let me move this around a little bit. One who accepts upon oneself a position of political authority for your own benefit is considered an adulterer.
Well, that's true.
That quote is too pregnant with possibilities
Holy.
for me to
Right
touch
now.
it.
Holy moly.
Imagine someone in political authority being considered an adulterer. I am shocked and dismayed. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Woe to those who have great authority, for it buries those who possess it." Rabbi Chama, son of Rabbi Hanina, said, "What is the meaning of the verse, 'You shall walk behind the Lord your God'?" It means that a person should imitate the righteous ways of the Holy One, blessed be God. Just as the Holy One clothed the naked, so too you must supply clothes to the naked. Just as the Holy One visited the sick, so too you should visit the sick. Just as the Holy One buried the dead, so too you must bury the dead. And just as the Holy One comforted mourners, so too you should comfort mourners. In Latin, I think this is called imitatio Dei. How do you conduct yourself? You imitate God. We're coming we're getting to gossip. Don't worry. This I find very interesting. They may sell a synagogue or other holy articles, even a Torah scroll, in order to support students or help marry off an orphan with money. The underlying, I think it's in the next quote, there are those who say the commandment to build and support a synagogue takes precedence over the commandment to give charity to the poor, but the commandment to give money to youth to learn Torah or to the sick among the poor takes precedent over the commandments to build and support a synagogue. There's another quote, which was quite long, and I didn't include it, which said, you may raise things in holiness, but you may not diminish things in holiness. So a school, in order to teach children, has a higher level of holiness than a synagogue in this understanding. And this is a quote that I bet some of you have seen. One day, Honi was journeying on the road and saw a man planting a carob tree. And he asked him, how long does it take for this tree to bear fruit? The man replied, 70 years. He then asked him, are you certain that you will live another 70 years? The man replied, I found matured carob trees in my world. As my ancestors planted these for me, so too I plant these for my children. Namely, we have a responsibility to future generations. This one, I love this story. It's a little long, so I apologize. This one's gonna, I think, drive Larry crazy. There was a Rabbi Bar Chana, who once hired workmen to transport barrels of wine for him. They were negligent, the workers were negligent, and as a result, the barrels of wine broke, and this man incurred a severe financial loss. He took the workers to court, suing them for the value of the wine that was destroyed. And the workers' only defense was, you know we can't afford it. We don't have the money. What are you going to do about it? So the courts found in favor of the workers. So Rabbi Bar Chana questioned the court and said, is this the law? Is it not the law that I am entitled to recover for their negligence? And the court told him, for you, this is the law. You are a righteous person. And because you are a righteous person, you have to take into account the equities of the situation, the unfairness, the fact that these are people who need the money, and therefore you are compelled by virtue of your righteous status to go beyond pressing your exact legal rights. Well then, and perhaps this is an ancient example of chutzpah, they turned around and sued him. The workers who destroyed the barrels sued the owner for their wages. They said, well, wait a second, you didn't pay us our wages for that day. He was dumbfounded. He said, okay, it's one thing to say I can't recover from you, but are you going to recover from me when you broke my wine because of your negligence? Astoundingly, the court said, yes, that's a good idea. You have to pay. And once again, he asked, is this the law? And they told him, for you, that's the law. These are the people who need the money, and therefore you must go beyond the law. This is a wonderful example of a principle I learned in rabbinical school that I have kind of highlighted at the top of the page. In a Jewish court, the role of the judge is not simply to disinterestedly analyze the facts of the case and compare them against the law of the land, but the judge has an additional responsibility, which is to represent God in the transaction. I don't think this would fly so well in our courts, would it, Larry?
Well, this is the reason you have insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So there's another book which is wonderful by Joseph Telushkin, who's written many wonderful books, called Words That Hurt, Words That Heal, How to Choose Words Widely and Well. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. What kind of speech do you think is prohibited in Jewish tradition?
Gossip.
Gossip. How would you define gossip?
Saying rumors about other people that are not true. And even if things are true, you're not supposed to talk about other people. It's,
Okay.
not your business to do that.
Okay. Any other thoughts about prohibited speech? Yes, Bryce.
I think that gossip it's one thing to relay information, but it's another thing to take joy out of relating the harm to someone else.
Yes, what's the German word? Schadenfreude?
Schadenfreude.
Yes, yes. Yes, interesting. Any other thoughts on?
Yeah, you should not talk about any other person or people in a negative manner unless it's required, a situation where it's required, that there's some overriding principle involved.
Okay.
Can I say something funny?
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I have a thought.
Yes.
If what everybody here is saying is true, and this is what our Bible says, there should nobody sitting on this jury up here should make any remarks about our president.
That's actually a very fair comment. And I would plead guilty as being the most guilty. Yes, Bryce.
I do think that talk to say we can't say anything bad about anyone. Okay, that's just wrong, because there are people in this world that you have to warn others about.
Right. So we're going to see rules, and we're going to see conditions attached to the rules.
So that's why I think the gossip part is actually when you are enjoying that you are saying something negative about someone else. I do think it's not information anymore, it's a pastime.
That's a very interesting distinction. And I would say this is one of the hardest commandments to comply with. Okay, let's get back to the discussion. So Lashon Ha-Rah, literally evil speech. Just a few initial quotes. Who is the person who is eager for life, who desires years of good fortune? Guard your tongue from speaking evil and your lips from deceitful speech. And actually the commandment in the Torah that a lot of these rules revolve around is you shall not go about as a talebearer among your people. There are three types of speech that we should decrease or eliminate. Information or comments that are non-defamatory and true. We're going to get into that. Negative, though true stories, that's Lashon Ha-Rah, and lies and rumor, sometimes called motzi shem ra, negative and false. Whoops. Okay, comments that are non-defamatory and true. So I want you to consider these kinds of comments. I was at Sue's party last night. I love what she's done with her house. How might that be a problem?
Well, there's an inference there that perhaps otherwise her taste is not good. And it's a shock that she did something nice.
Oh, that's nice. I hadn't actually thought about that, but I like that. Also, suppose the person you're talking to hadn't been invited to Sue's party. So one of the things that I think is going on here is you should have, it's not easy, you should have a filter. I think of it as like a spell checker. When you're typing in a word processor, you know how it sort of instantly sees that you've spelled a word wrong and you can correct it before you print it, although it doesn't take the apostrophe S out all the time. You should be filtering your speech even as you say it and really before you say it, to be thinking about the effect on other people. Here's another example. Janet is a wonderful person. I could name 100 things I adore about Janet. There's only one thing I can't stand about her. Now, what do you want to hear? In the story of Job, in a book of the Bible, the whole problem with Job's life is stimulated because God is bragging to Satan, about how wonderful Job is. And Satan says, yeah, that's because he has a really good life. He's got family and he's healthy and he's wealthy. And so Satan says to God, if he didn't have that, then he wouldn't be so loyal and faithful to you. And God says, this sounds like something we ought to check out. And the whole book of Job is about that. A very interesting example is the story of Oliver Sipple, who's an ex-Marine who saved the life of Gerald Ford in 1975. He just
and he's
happened
actually been mentioned now because of Gay Pride Month.
Oh, it has been mentioned? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, because the New York Times did a small story on him this past week.
So the story was, he was standing next to, I don't know if it was Squeaky Fromme or poor Gerald Ford. He was a nice guy, never bothered anybody. He had 2 attempts on his life. I think it wasn't Squeaky Fromme. I think it was the other one. But anyway, somebody took out a gun, went to shoot the president. This guy responded instinctively as a Marine and stopped her from killing the president. Of course, everybody wanted to know about this man who saved the president's life. And he said, please, I value my privacy. I did what anybody would do. I really don't want anything printed about my life. And so do you think the press complied with that? No. They dug and dug and found out he was living in San Francisco. He was active in gay in gay rights organizations. And when
he had not come out yet.
He had not come out, so his family living in Kansas did not know. And because of the publicity, they found out. He wasn't invited into his father's funeral and was completely estranged from his family. He went into a depression and a few years later, was basically found dead in his apartment.
Wow.
So, and the writer who wrote about him said, I wish, I had it to do over again. So here they were only writing good things about, they wanted to write about him because he was a hero. There's another example that actually happened to Sonia and me. We were at Torah study at Temple Nerami, and we're kind of schmoozing before we're sitting down to begin Torah study. And one person was not there. And somebody said, where is this person? And Sonia says, oh, I hope she comes. I absolutely adore her. And somebody chimed in and says, oh, yeah, she's not as good as you think she is. So again, the person saying that was not doing the right thing, but you have to observe that Sonia saying nice things about her led to some difficulties. Now,
can we go back? Can we go back to the first one? Because that relates very much to me, that I see that in the first one, the suit.
Okay.
When somebody says, I love what she's done with her house, that person has no business judging what Sue did with her house. And that's the kind of person who is then likely to have, critical thoughts about what somebody else has done to their house. So this is the kind of person that I would never, I would be afraid myself that if there was something she didn't like about what I had done, that she'd be going and talking to other people about what I did.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Can I share something?
Sure.
Over the last year, I developed a friendship with a black man. And what I learned was that I could have no way of having the perspective that they have when it comes to things. Mm-hmm. Because when someone says to him, oh, you have a nice car, okay, it's like, why should a black man? It's so surprising that a black man has a nice car.
Yes.
I mean, it's so difficult to understand how our remarks can be misunderstood.
Yes. And so what I would say is, this is true, black, white, gay, it's true of everyone. One of the things I've learned from Sonia, who I often describe as my rabbi, is we Americans are very intrusive in inquiring into other people's lives and business. So, for example, it's very common, and I did this, until Sonia sensitized me. I would ask somebody, you meet somebody, oh, what do you do for a living?
Do that.
Well, if the person's out of work, that's a painful question. How many children do you have? So if you've had a child die, how do you answer that question? How many children do you have? So,
Reb,
yes,
can
sure.
at some point, it's just being a person though, and making conversation with other people. I understand what you're saying, but I mean, you can only watch so much, and you also have to know who to trust and who's going to repeat what you say and who's going to keep it to themselves. You have to have friends to confide in and vent. All of this is very good, but you kind of have to once in a while.
Okay, so on the level of cocktail party conversation, instead of what do you do for a living, how many children do you have, how might you break ice with someone like this?
Tell me about yourself.
Yeah, what are you interested in?
Exactly. Exactly.
Right?
It's a way of, people generally like to talk about themselves. And they might say, you know what, I love to spend time with my grandchildren. Or, I love my job. Or and then they can bring it up. If there's a sore spot, they can bring it up. But it does take sensitivity. And I would say that sensitivity is a mitzvah. And mitzvah means commandment. So you are to worry about how other people feel, and it takes work, and it's not easy. I absolutely agree with you. There are people that you know and trust and spend a lot of your life with, and you're going to speak differently to them than you would to just anyone. But the point here is speech should be regulated, even speech that we don't necessarily think of. Negative truths. Go ahead.
One other, the story of Richard Jewell comes to mind from that last example. He was the guy in the
bomber thing.
Yeah, he like found the bomber or something, and so the FBI said, "Oh, then you're the bomber."
Yeah.
And they destroyed his life, completely destroyed it, and his life was ruined until they actually years later found the real bomber.
Yeah, interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Okay, we actually have some material to cover. Lashon Ha-Rah is literally bad language or bad tongue. Lashon actually means tongue. It can also mean language. Jewish law forbids spreading negative truths unless the person needs the information. Somebody mentioned that, such as a prospective employer or employee, a romantic partner, a physician. You find out your friend is dating this guy and he seems like a great match, but you happen to know he's married. A physician is an alcoholic or, has 14 malpractice suits against him. And even then the texts say, you should say, don't go to that physician. And the person says, why? And you say, do you trust me? Yes, I trust you. Don't go to that physician. So you don't reveal, say only the minimum necessary. And then somebody said this, and I think it's right. Pretty much anything that feels delicious and exciting to tell, that you are telling mostly to promote yourself in the eyes of others. There is even something called the dust of Lashon Ha-Rah. So it's kind of like the example I gave before. Don't ask me what I think of her. I haven't said anything bad about her, but guess where the conversation is going? And in our tradition, it's okay to be less than completely truthful. There's a story about God telling Sarah she'll bear a child, and Sarah laughs and says, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? And then God asks Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I in truth bear a child old as I am? The Talmud says, great is peace, particularly peace in the house, seeing that for its sake, God modified the truth. With Lashon Ha-Rah, 3 people are injured. The teller, the person told about, and the listener. Yes, it's a violation of the commandment just to listen to Lashon Ha-Rah. and it's worse, much worse, if you ask for the salacious details. How serious? There's a Jewish teaching that said it would be better for a person to have never been born than to experience these 7 things: death of his children in his lifetime, economic dependence on others, an unnatural death, forgetting his learning, suffering slavery, or publicly shaming his fellow man. Not being shamed, but shaming someone else. It says, whoever shames his neighbor in public, it's as if he shed his blood. And the idea is that the blood drains from the person's face. Even the dead going to Gehenna, the place of punishment, are shielded from shame. And one midrash, the souls of the dead in Gehenna assume different forms and are hidden with smoke and brimstone, so that one should not see the punishment of the other, and none should be put to shame before another, except those who have publicly shamed others. And the special punishments described for slanderers, they are hanged by their tongues.
Ooh.
But I love this. You know, even in Gehenna, you won't recognize the person standing next to you. Lies and rumors, the third category. Only if something is as clear to you as the fact that your sister is forbidden to you as a sexual mate, only then say it. And, you know, biblical examples, Haman lies about the Jews refusing to obey the laws of the land. He lies to Ahasuerus. Bertrand Russell pointed out, nobody ever gossips about other people's secret virtues. I need a quote. And Rabbi Telushkin asks us to ask ourselves 3 questions. Is it true? Is it necessary? And is it fair?
I don't think the Bertrand Russell thing is actually necessarily true. Sometimes people, when you find out that someone is a secret benefactor to someone, it is a matter of interest and people talk about it.
Yeah, but I wouldn't call it gossip.
Okay.
So there's 2 stories here. The tongue is compared to an arrow in a Jewish teaching. Why not another weapon, a sword, for example? Because if a man unsheaths his sword to kill his friend, and his friend pleads with him and begs for mercy, the man may be mollified and return the sword to his scabbard. But an arrow once shot cannot be returned, no matter how much one wants to.
Words
This is
cannot be unsaid.
right.
Yeah, it's the pillow and the feather.
Yes, so you probably know this story, but if you don't, you should. In a small Eastern European town, a man went through the community slandering the rabbi. Unthinkable. One day, feeling suddenly remorseful, he begged the rabbi for forgiveness and offered to undergo any penance to make amends. The rabbi told him to take a feather pillow from his home, cut it open, scatter the feathers to the wind, and then return to see him. The man did as he was told and came to the rabbi and asked, "Am I now forgiven?" Almost, came the response. "You just have to go and do one more thing, gather all the feathers." "But that's impossible," the man protested. "The wind has already scattered them." "Precisely. And although you truly wish to correct the evil you have done, it's impossible to repair the damage done by your words as it is to recover the feathers." Or someone once said, I can keep a secret, just the people that I tell that can't keep the secret.
You know what Benjamin Franklin said, 2 people can keep a secret if one of them is dead.
Yes, I remember that. Okay, this is a long story, but I love it. So I guess you don't have any choice. Rabbi Israel of Vishnitz was in the habit of strolling with his assistant for a half hour every evening. On one such occasion, they stopped in front of the house of a certain wealthy bank manager. The man was known to be a maskil, a follower of the Enlightenment movement, i.e. anything but a follower of the Rebbe, the Hasidic term for a rabbinic leader. Rabbi Israel knocked on the door, and when a servant opened it, entered the house. The puzzled Gabbai, without asking a word, followed the Rebbe inside. The bank manager received his distinguished guest respectfully and politely. The Rebbe took the seat that was offered him and sat for quite some time without saying a word. Knowing that protocol would deem it impertinent to ask the Rebbe directly for the reason for his visit, the host whispered his question to the Rebbe's assistant, but the Gabbai simply shrugged his shoulders. After a good while, the Rebbe rose to leave and bid his host farewell. The bank manager accompanied him to the door, and his understandable curiosity getting the better of him, asked, "Could you please explain to me, Rebbe, why you honored me with this visit?" "I went to your house to fulfill a mitzvah," a religious commandment the Rebbe required. And thank God I was able to fulfill it. And what mitzvah is that? Asked the confused bank manager. Our sages teach that just as one is commanded to say that which will be listened to, so one is commanded not to say that which will not be listened to. Now, if I remain in my house and you in yours, what kind of mitzvah is it if I refrain from telling you that which will not be listened to? So in order to fulfill the mitzvah properly, one obviously has to go to the house of the person who will not listen and there refrain from speaking to him. And that's exactly what I did. Perhaps, Rebbe, the bank manager, said the bank manager, you would be so good as to tell me what this thing is. Who knows? Perhaps I will listen. I'm afraid you won't, said the Rebbe. The longer the Rebbe refused, the greater grew the curiosity of the other to know the secret. He continued to press the Rebbe to reveal that which would not be listened to. Very well, said the Rebbe finally. A certain penniless widow owes your bank quite a sum for the mortgage of her house. Within a few days, your bank is going to dispose of her house by public sale, and she will be out on the street. I wanted to ask you to overlook her debt, but didn't because of the mitzvah of not saying. But what can you expect me to do? Asked the bank manager in amazement. Surely you realize that the debt is not owed to me personally, but to the bank, and I am only its manager, not its owner, and the debt runs into several hundreds, and if it's exactly as I said all along, the Rebbe interrupted, that you would not want to hear. With that, he ended the conversation and walked away. The bank manager went into his house, but the Rebbe's words found their way into his heart and gave him no rest until he paid the widow's debt out of his own pocket. Knowing how to offer criticism and affect change, even when one is not directly criticizing, that is a trait we should all strive to acquire. Moving toward the end.
Behavior.
I'm sorry?
Modeling good behavior.
Yes, actually, that's what this is all about. Yes. There's an additional factor we ought to take into account as we decide between the various alternatives. A man once came to the Kotzker Rebbe and asked for his blessing that a man's children would grow up to be faithful Jews. The rabbi asked him, is this really what you want? Yes, said the man. Then said the Kotzker Rebbe, you yourself should be a faithful Jew. You should occupy yourself with words of Torah and take care to live as a Jew lives. If you do, your children will grow up to copy your ways. But if you do not, and you desire it only for your children will copy your ways. They themselves will not be faithful Jews, but they will want their children to be. Then the Kotzker added, this is mentioned explicitly in Deuteronomy, saying, but take utmost care and watch yourself scrupulously, so that you do not forget the things you saw with your own eyes, and so that they do not fade from your mind as long as you live, and make them known to your children and your children's children. That is, if you forget the words of Torah and do not watch yourself scrupulously, if you do not occupy yourself with Torah, but only mention it in passing to your children, then they will do as you do, and only mention Torah to their children. Our ultimate measure is the fact that the way we act teaches our children. We should act beyond the minimum measure because we hope our children will grow up to be decent human beings and they will do what we model for them. Almost done. Some nice quotes. In the words of the Hasidic Rebbe Nachman of Bratslav, if you are not going to be any better tomorrow than you were today, then what need have you for tomorrow? Rabbi Milton Steinberg. When I was young, I admired clever people. Now that I'm older, I admire kind people. Rabbi Jack Riemer writes a beautiful set of writing, and he says we should strive to increase saying these four phrases. Thank you, I love you, how are you, and what do you need? And Rabbi Harold Kushner, only God can give us credit for the angry or other cruel words that we did not speak.
By the way,
yes.
I like that.
Could you go back to the previous screen?
Sure.
The line from Rabbi Milton Steinberg.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you ever saw the movie Harvey, but that is a paraphrasing from what Jimmy Stewart says, and to explain who he was and how he acts.
I didn't know that. That's
yes.
Very interesting.
Is Larry still there?
He is.
Rabbi, would you go back to the first part, please? Larry, if you're not going to play any better tomorrow than you were today, why go tomorrow?
He's talking about the golf course.
What else?
There is always hope.
Yes. Okay.
See how my mind works.
One more slide and then, whoops, I'm sorry, wrong way. Upcoming classes. So on July 8th, a little discussion about Sephardic Jewry. And on July 15th, sorry, 1 week later, the joys of Hebrew. And this is not teaching Hebrew, but why Hebrew, I think, is so wonderful, and how some of the phrases in the Bible, in the original Hebrew, opens up meaning. And please note, no classes or office hours next week. And then the following week, I'll be back. So
enjoy the desert. Enjoy the desert.
Yes. Sonia and I are off to Borrego Springs to socially distance from everyone but each other, and enjoy a
Nice.
pool. So, any comments, questions? As I always say, alternative sermons and talks. Yes, Shlomo.
The whole discussion that seemed to focus on money, I think money was a convenient metaphor. It really had to do with respecting the integrity and the humanness of these other people, their feelings, their desires, and the money was almost irrelevant. It's show respect for other people as a human being, whether they seem very different from you and you don't quite understand why they're acting.
Yes, I think it's an important comment, and the reason that originally I was going to focus on business ethics, and I opened it up more to personal ethics because I think money so often is the vehicle. We all talk about how much we love humanity and everything else, and the phrase I once used, I learned this in the tax shelter finance business. I couldn't be more sincere if I meant it. When it comes to how you handle your money, it's really sort of where the rubber hits the road. Yeah, it's wonderful to be loving and caring, but are you going to pay people? I mean, these days, if you're running a business, are you going to pay people who can't come to work because of COVID? It's a huge issue for synagogues about people that work at the synagogue. I mean, and I can tell you, having spent time both actually chatting on Facebook with my colleagues who are Reform rabbis, get a lot of grief from their temple boards about issues of continuing to pay staff during these times. And, quite often temple boards are focused on the bottom line and on money. And they seem to forget that it's the rabbi's job to point out that our tradition has a lot to say about these issues. And particularly as Reform Jews, we should be focusing more on these issues than how do you light a Hanukkah, or, how do you play dreidel?
So the bottom line should not be money. The bottom line should be the people that the money will help or hurt.
Yeah, I would say that's true, but it's so easy in our society and culture that money is the cutting edge. It really is where people kind of reveal whether they really are concerned or not. And I would say
it's not only the cutting edge, but sometimes it cuts quite deeply.
Yes. And I would say that's also behind this idea that that's the first question that you're asked in heaven. It's not, have you kept strictly kosher? It's not, did you wear your tzitzit all the time? Or did you go to services 3 times a day or once a week or whatever? Because that is relatively easy than treating workers, tenants, others, investors, customers fairly.
And it has
It's a measure. It's a measure of your generosity and your humanity.
And the
How you
other
handle your-
coin of the realm, please excuse me for jumping in, is do you honor the feelings of the other person, their self-respect,
yes,
their opinions, which you may not agree with, but do you honor the core of these other people?
Yeah, do you recognize that they are created in the image of God? There's another story that I didn't include. I mean, we're running late anyway. There's a story about a rabbi meets a man, I don't know, a wagon driver or something, and he just can't control himself. And he says, "You are one of the ugliest people I've ever seen." I mean, this is not exactly how it reads, but he just remarks. And the man says to him, "I'm sorry, your issue is not with me, but with my creator." And then, of course, the rabbi realizes what he said, and for the rest of the trip tries to apologize for having said it. And how often do we blurt out something and then spend so much time trying to apologize? You know, words are arrows. You can't pull them back.
Especially get it back.
Yeah. Okay.
I heard somebody say something like that about a criminal. Don't say bad things about the criminal. Talk to the programmer.
Yeah, so same thought. But we're responsible for our actions. So there's a tension there. I mean, I would say that's why I say the laws of Lashon Ha-Rah are practically impossible. The most difficult thing to do, and I've done it a few times, is you're in a group of people and they're talking about somebody, and you would say, you know what, this is one of the 613. We should not be talking like this. See if you're invited back to Sue's next party.
Yes, don't talk to other people about Sue's party and how you loved her house.
Right.
Talk to Sue.
Right.
She would love to hear you say how much you loved her house.
She actually would. That's very good advice. Okay, on that happy note, I will wish you a good evening. And I am, behind this chair where the image of my tachat is firmly pressed into. 4 to 5 every day. Tell your friends, and won't see you next week, but the following week. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
It is
Thank
a joy
you.
to be
Have
with
a
you.
good time on your vacation.
Okay, take care.
Have a nice week.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Enjoy. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go ahead. There you go.
It's a home button.
It's so funny to watch everybody disappear one by
I'm
one.
trying to. Bye, Rabbi.